Hi, my name is Nikki Blomstrand, and today I'm going to be presenting on restorative practices in the field of education, specifically with a focus on restorative practices as a behavior intervention strategy. Just a little overview of today's presentation. We're going to start off by defining restorative practice and giving a little bit of background information on it as a subject. Then we're going to see and talk about what its purpose is in the field of education, what it is used for. And then I have chosen to break it down into two main categories to make it a little bit more digestible, and that is proactive strategies and repair strategies. We're going to follow that by looking a little bit deeper into a case study that takes place in Denver, Colorado. And then I'm going to finish with a little bit of personal testimony. One of the reasons I chose this subject to present on today is because I am fortunate enough to work in a district that has spent the last several years moving towards using restorative practices and really ingraining that into the fibers of our community. And I'm very proud to say that we are now making it more of an emphasis and a focal point than ever. And it is definitely going to be one of our pillars or foundations that we use to build as we move into the future of our school district in Glastonbury. So let's get started. So first we have to talk about what we mean by restorative practices. So one of the great definitions that I found that generalizes it as it isn't just a concept that applies to education is a transdisciplinary field of study that examines how to strengthen relationships between individuals and improve social connections within communities. From a wonderful article called Restorative Practices Explained that really gets down to the nitty-gritty and basics of it as well. And some of the components that are part of restorative practices are creating dialogue, making connections between divided groups, and conflict resolutions and repairs. So that kind of showcases it's a spectrum where it ranges from proactive and everyday practices that are going to build a strong foundation for our community to help prevent conflicts from arising, all the way to prescribing how to work through conflicts and what the repairs and plans to move forward from conflicts or situations that are difficult that may arise, how to move forward from those from both a student and a staff and a community perspective. And on that note, the goals of restorative practices are to foster a positive environment where all community members have a say. So in schools, this looks like the students feeling that they have a voice too, as opposed to just being told by adults what to do. Encouraging collaboration and teamwork. Again, that is peer-to-peer, staff-to-staff, and peer-to-staff relationships. And then foster creative and active problem solving that serves the needs of the individual and the community. So really developing those skills. Before we dive in specifically to schools, who benefits from restorative practices in schools? As I mentioned, and I will allude to many times throughout this presentation, it is not just about the students. The students are obviously a very large component of restorative practices in the school setting, but it is not just to benefit them. Part of the reason that restorative practices are so successful is because it is truly about the community of the school as a whole. So that means giving the students, the teachers and staff, the ability and the means and the skills and the direction to not only buy into their community and the well-being of the community as a whole, but also each other and their own individual success. And when you have all three of those things working in tandem, it benefits everyone involved and the community at large, because we can take those skills that we as educators or students learn as children to then generalize those out in the community and really strengthen all those relationships that exist outside the classroom as well. All right, so a closer look at the purpose of restorative practices in schools. So first and foremost, we want to encourage positive changes in behavior of students to reduce the need for disciplinary measures that take them away from the classroom. This is suspensions and expulsion. So any disciplinary measure that is going to take the child out of their learning environment out of the opportunity for socialization and peer interactions, and just any loss of access to their least restrictive learning environment and the curriculum that we want to be teaching them, right? Our goal is we can't possibly maximize these children's success academically, socially, or as human beings if they are being excluded from the environment. So we want to, this is a restorative practice is a means of saying, hey, these things are going to happen. There are going to be instances where things are going to happen that necessitate this level of disciplinary action. But what can we do to minimize that? Because anytime that we're taking a child out of their LRE or really out of any environment where they have the exposure to the setting that we want them to have in the curriculum, we're reducing their opportunity to learn. So restorative practices has a goal of keeping them in the classroom and in the community. And in that, we want to create a community first mindset that encourages students and staff to act within the best interest of the whole school in mind, to create a team oriented and accountability mindset. So again, this is weaving that fabric of we are all working towards one common goal. We are all one entity in order for this, ship to stay afloat, in order for us to make forward progress. No one person can do it alone. We want everyone to really buy into that community mindset where if we work together by presenting our best self and molding our best self, and also learning empathy and the ability to reflect on how our actions affect others, we want to better the community around us and be responsible for our role both as an individual and our role within the larger entity of the school community. And to do that, we have to develop and teach skills and strategies that can proactively de-escalate situations of conflict, avoid conflict altogether, and also help to foster an environment and a community that people and students want to be a part of to begin with. And in the instance, since we know it is inevitable that conflict and difficult situations and problems will arise, we need to be able to help restore trust and repair those relationships that may have been damaged, and be able to keep that community and that sense of belonging strong, so that even after we hit bumps in the road, again, we keep that bond and that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation to do better and make changes to avoid the conflict next time and continue strengthening our environment or our community around us. So the first step in that is our proactive strategies. So peace talks, which we will get into a little bit more when we go into the case study as far as where it comes from. Peace talks is essentially a catch-all phrase to represent just positive interactions that are buy-ins for that sense of community. So peace talks can look like morning meetings. It can look like silly questions. It can look like, icebreakers, not just restricted to the first day of school, but continually throughout the school year, so that children and staff alike all get to know each other. And because the more you know about a person, the more you understand a person, the more you feel you have a relationship with that person, the more likely you are to want to do well by the people around you. And part of that, another strategy that goes hand in hand with that is classroom charters. Classroom charters are something that we use in my school and many schools around the country that are practicing restorative practices, that are essentially a list of agreed upon rules that are created by the class as a whole with the input of students and staff within the classroom to set the expectations, set the rules for the classroom, so they're an active participant instead of, again, just being told by adults what their expectation is and what to do, which, sets the tone for them having a voice, and also immediately adds in that self-reflection piece. Like, what, when we are building our roles, what are some expectations of the classroom? How do you think people should treat classroom materials? How would you like to see yourself and your classmates interact with classroom materials? Typically a response to that is that they want them to, be used appropriately. Okay, so now they have been given a voice, they have already done some self-reflecting, and given us some insight into what they know their expectations are and what the expectations should be and what they think they should be. And then you finish by signing or agreeing to it in some form or way. In my class, it looks like signing it and everybody having their own individual copy with each classmate's signature and each teacher's signature so that everybody has bought in and agreed upon to these rules. Similarly, we have check-ins. Those can look like class check-ins, with a morning meeting or a point sheet or a scheduled conference. They can be daily, they can be weekly, they can be with, again, a class as a whole, teacher to student individually, or a specialist to student one-to-one, whether that is a counselor or a restorative practice interventionist or specialist that is in the school. It can be set up a variety of ways, but it's just really the practice of regularly checking in to make sure that, especially the students in this case, are doing well and they are feeling safe and motivated and comfortable and happy within their environment. And if not, what's the cause of that and how can we get ahead by proactively helping with this as opposed to waiting until that communication of something's wrong is communicated in the form of a behavior, and now we're solving an entirely different set of problems. We can provide quiet spaces and safe spaces for children, both within the classroom and throughout the school. Very important, especially if used proactively. This can be a very powerful tool. Schools can be a stressful and overstimulating environment for a lot of children, and especially children with disabilities and other needs. And so giving these children spaces to go before they're really escalated and having a really, really hard time is a great tool. Goal setting is another tool that really is about that buy-in. By setting goals both individually for students and as classes and as communities, it gives students that voice. And, any of us are going to want to work towards something that we feel passionate about, that we actually want to do. We are going to inherently be more motivated by our own intrinsic motivations as opposed to someone telling us that that's what we're working towards, right? So by including the students in on the goal setting and then also, again, creating that sense of community by working towards a common goal, or even if it's their individual goal, but they know that they have your support in doing that through check-ins. If it's a year-long goal, maybe once a quarter, that's going to motivate them to stay on track and give them something to work towards and want to practice bettering themselves and achieving that goal. And it's also going to feel really good for them along the way. And it's going to give that positive feedback. So, and finally, on the staff end, especially trauma-informed training for staff is a very, very powerful proactive strategy that goes hand in hand with restorative practices. I certainly could give an entire presentation just on trauma-informed training alone, but especially when you talk about dealing with minority populations, the disability community, um, and the general education community as well. You need to have trauma-informed training is extremely powerful and can provide so many benefits and really just set us as educators up to be better equipped to understand our students' needs and therefore be able to meet them. Restorative practices focus on repair strategies. All right, so again, back to our Denver, Colorado case study, peace walks go hand in hand with peace talks, just on the other end. So, and really the next 3 bullet points, peace walks, behavioral social mapping, and restorative questions, all go hand in hand. They're a little bit slightly different iterations of the same idea, which is that after a conflict arises, that's not the end of it, right? You might have a conflict arise. There can even be a big blow up. There can be lots of behaviors involved. There can be a large range of, it could be, student to teacher, it could be student to student, it could be a group of students, it could be multiple students and staff. All of your conflicts are going to look very different in the players that are part of it, and also, how those conflicts manifest. Is it verbal? Is it physical? Is it passive aggressive? Is it, property destruction? There's going to be a lot of variety, but these provide kind of an outline for like a prescriptive outline for how to repair these conflicts that is backed by clinical research, has the input of different varieties of clinicians, psychologists, school counselors, therapists, mediators that have come together to create these prescriptive measures that can be used to help mediate the conflict, facilitate the appropriate repairs, and successfully have the individuals involved reintegrate into the community in a way that salvages, if not in some cases, strengthens the relationships that may have been damaged during the conflict. So, this image that you see here is actually a behavioral social map that one of my school psychologists sent out at the beginning of this year. She sent it out in our district along with a restorative questions, which is kind of a next step up of this. So we tend to use the behavior social mapping for early to middle elementary, and then that late elementary, we flip to the restorative questions. But the same ideas apply. So, and for Peace Walks as well, Peace Walks was again something that was created in Denver, Colorado. And that is the physical act. So these are the peace walks are called that because it started with this woman rolling out a piece of butcher paper, and on it she had footprints that went from one end to the middle and then from the other end to the middle, and along that way were prescribed restorative questions. So students could quite literally walk physically towards each other as they worked their way through the restorative questions and would meet each other in the center when they had resolved their conflict and were ready to come up with a plan to move forward from it. So really, really cool idea. And then these behavior social mapping and restorative questions are just a more paper pencil approach to it. So just to take you through it quickly, it says what happened and ask the child to explain the problem. I'm going to use a student as this example, but what happened, explain the problem. Then it says all about me. This is where those I statements come in without saying, we're having you make an I statement, but we asked them what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what they said, and what they did during the time of the conflict. Then we talked to them about who was involved. They were involved. Was another student or peer involved? Was a teacher or adult involved? And was a whole class or group involved, whether directly or indirectly? And then from there, we then asked them to do that reflection piece. So all about the others. What did they say? We'll say it was peer to peer. What did that friend say? How do you think that friend was feeling? What do you think that friend was thinking? Sorry. What do you think that friend was feeling? What did that friend actually say? What did that friend actually do? So now that we've gotten their feelings, the impact of it, of who was involved in the community, and we've asked them to do that, put yourself in other people's shoes portion, we can then take their answers from that and ask them, what do you think you need to do to make things right? How do we resolve this? And something to note with this is that we also, in this question, if it applies, will ask them, what do you need to feel better about this? If this was a situation that involved two peers who both made social mistakes during the interaction, one might have pushed the other, but the other one responded by saying something rude or unkind as opposed to just going and telling adult, both children in that instant probably feel a degree of hurt, and they both are looking for some level of apology or restoration or repair. So it's important to note that as well. It is not just about placing blame on a single child. It truly is looking at reflecting on the situation as a whole. So again, these are all options of kind of prescribed conflict resolution and restorative conversations. They also entail the reentry circles. And then I did also put counseling on there because depending on the nature of the conflict or just the need of the child, counseling from a therapist or a school psychologist or, an additional personnel might be necessary or appropriate. All right, so that case study that we keep talking about. So Doramore Elementary School is in Denver, Colorado, and it is one of 3 schools that received a 3-year, $663,000 grant from the NEA Great Public Schools to the Restorative Justice Partnership, so the RJP. So they received this phenomenal grant that they have now been using to really put a focus and shift to implementing restorative practices into their school. And now that they are a couple years into this, they are now having, people come from all over the country to spend time in their schools and really see how it is shaping their school environment, the impact that it's having, see the work being done firsthand, and hear the testimonies from the students and staff to then hopefully bring back to their schools and advocate for that route to be an option in their schools as well. And just some examples of what they are doing specifically at Doramore Elementary. So they are doing morning circles, those peace talks that I talked to you about. They call their morning circles peace talks. These are silly talks, icebreakers, questions to get kids just interacting with each other and staff to build those relationships and build that buy-in. The peace walks, again, I talked about the butcher paper, that really, really cool physical component to doing the restorative conversations. And it started with our principal walking around with this on a piece of butcher paper that she was rolled up and carrying around. And it became such a successful and such a popular choice for children to make repairs with that is now turned into a vinyl form. Sorry, they basically printed it on vinyl and made multiple copies, and you can find them all over the school in many classrooms, in the cafeteria, in the gym, in therapist's office, clinician's office. So it's really, really took off and is a popular approach for kids to be able to add a physical component into that restorative and repair conversations, which is very, very cool. So in that, they're developing these conflict resolution skills, and they do put a heavy emphasis on those conflict resolution skills that the children can then take out into their homes and communities. Because they have this grant, they do have restorative practice specialists on campus at both this school, the North Elementary, and the middle school that was part of this grant recipient. And so they have regular one-to-one, I believe it's a daily, definitely it's a daily check-ins with this restorative practice specialist. So they have a really big emphasis on focus on consistent positive feedback. They want these children to not only have an outlet if there is an issue, but they also want there to be a really positive dialogue to build those students up. They also have seen, so now a little bit about the results of this. So they have seen a decrease in suspension and expulsions at all 3 schools, which is phenomenal, right? More time in the classroom, getting that instruction we want them to have. They have been able to address biases and institutionalized racism that is reflected in the disproportionate number of students of color who are the recipients of these traditional disciplinary actions. So something that they talked about was the school to prison pipeline that was of major concern when they took on this grant. Was that something that had been of focus and study in the area, and they wanted to make a change and impact on. So 15% of the total population were Black students in 2016, and 31% of school-related arrests were Black students in that same year. So a very disproportionate amount of number, almost more than double the expected population, were the ones that were the recipients of school-related arrests and referrals. So that school to prison pipeline was something that they were very highly motivated to reduce. And in doing that, not only did they see the decrease in these negative aspects, like those harsh, isolating disciplinary actions, but they also saw positive results. The advancement project report found indicators of achievement had increased at schools utilizing restorative practices. So again, just another endorsement for the effectiveness of restorative practices in education. All right, so a little bit about my district. So I work at the Lynx Academy in Glastonbury, Connecticut, which is a K through 12 outplacement program for children with intensive special needs, and especially a focus on emotional and behavioral disorders. So I am really, really passionate about this because I have seen how powerful restorative practices can be and the difference it can make in the accessibility of education, especially for high risk students. It's a passion of mine and something that I have been really, really fortunate to get to be a part of. So, just on a personal note, I talked about it earlier. We do have a classroom charter that my students and I developed together in conjunction with the paras in my room, and that we all contributed to, agreed to, and signed, and we still reference every single day. We do morning meetings every single day. They are led by me, and they range from, just the expectations of the day, what the schedule is, the date itself, any shares from the students that they might want to talk about. We just had a long weekend. They love to talk about coming back from a long weekend and all the things they did, but also some, silly icebreaker questions that we do every single day so kids continue to open up, because you never know what random information is going to unlock a big tidbit. Like, for example, the question a couple weeks ago was, would you rather be a werewolf in a pack for the rest of your life, or would you rather be a vampire but be alone for the rest of your life? And you would not believe the information I got out of my students about their families, their preferences, their hobbies, and just I found out that they had a deep, deep, deep love for, fantastical items. And, just having those little tidbits about them is so, not only is it fun to see them get excited and have their morning start off by, being so exuberant to share with their class and talk about themselves, but it also really gives me a lot of insight. All right, I am running out of time here. We have a quiet space called the Zen Den, which is a quiet space in our classroom, also known as a cozy corner or calm corner, which is used very proactively by students. They know if they need a break, they can go take a break in there. It's not going to penalize them if it's being used to regulate their body and they come back out ready to work. The Haven is this phenomenal therapeutic space that we have in our school setup, where you can go down. There is always a clinician and a para in there dedicated to the space, and within that space there is a quiet Zen den where they can lay down, not be bothered, not talk, read a book. There are sensory options. There are interactive game options. Again, you have the clinician there that you can meet with and talk to if you're experiencing some sort of crisis that needs intervention. There's an OT area if you need to get your body moving, that our occupational therapist changes out the exercises and the programs within every 3 weeks. The kids absolutely love that area. And then we also have our therapy dogs in there as well, which is great. We do goal setting. We did a class goal and we did individual goals for them to work towards for the school year. We have a point sheet which offers reflections and check-ins throughout the day to see where they're at, how they're feeling, what they need to work on, including in the morning. They rate their sleep, their mood, and their what they've eaten today, 0 through 3. Anything 1 or below, immediate check-in from me. Hey, just want to check in on you. See you chose a 0 or 1. Anything we can do? Do you need a snack? Do you need a rest? How can we get through this day? The Haven is always available. If you feel like you need to go there, I'll make you an appointment. And then we also use, like I said before and showed you, that social mapping in conjunction with restorative questions, counseling, and our repairs to reentry. Again, I'm running out of time, so really quickly, this visual over here is phenomenal and a really, really great resource to kind of show the trajectory of restorative practices. All right, so really, really quick, if anybody is looking to get this off the ground in their school, I suggest going to the CDC website. They have, and I linked the PDF to their starter booklet here, phenomenal resource, and just really hits all the points on how restorative practice in schools help promote a healthy community. And just really quickly, I want to finish by saying that the benefits of using restorative practices in schools are supported by the research and continuing to grow. They excel when extend well beyond the classroom by modeling positive relationships and developing conflict resolution skills that can be generalized in continued education, entering the workforce, at home within families, and out in the community. Furthermore, they place the focus on helping students grow instead of punishing them for their imperfections or mistakes. All right, thank you.